in Auckland.
Mr Speaker.
I call the Honourable Member Louise Upston.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm pleased to be able to stand and speak in the second reading of the local government borrowing bill. It's great to see that it is being supported by the Labour opposition because clearly this is about reducing costs for local government. And the member before me had spoken about the fact that perhaps the level of debt by local governments wasn't at the rate at which we have spoken about previously. But Treasury's projections still, Mr Speaker, are that local government borrowing will jump 2/3 over a 5-year period and getting to the range of about $10 billion. And, Mr Speaker, there wouldn't be a week that goes by without having a constituent in one of my electorate offices concerned about increases in their rates. And probably more importantly, their ability to be able to constrain those rates increases. And that's really what the Minister of Local Government, one of the clear focuses has been in his work. So the local government borrowing bill has two parts in it. The first is, of course, the creation and the operations of the New Zealand Local Government Funding Agency, their ability to issue local government bonds to New Zealand and also overseas investors, that they are then able to re-lend to local authorities for capital and infrastructure projects. The second part of it is the ability for Auckland Council to borrow in foreign currencies. So, as we heard from the Minister, there weren't many submissions in the Select Committee process, only 6, of which 5 of them were strongly in support, with a few comments about how we could possibly tweak it to improve it. But, Mr Speaker, this is a common sense bill. It's solving a very real problem that affects district councils differently up and down the country. We've got some councils that have incredibly high gearing, others that are low, some that are managing their capital investment requirements in different ways. So, in effect, what this does is level out some of those differences up and down the country and provide the ability for local councils to borrow at realistic rates and get some real economies of scale around their interest costs. Because we know, Mr Speaker, that strong, good local government is vital for each of our communities, be they small or large. The success of local government is vital to our economy and also to the protection of our environment. But the reality is we cannot be in a situation where rates continue to rise and debts that are taken on by local government are at unsustainable levels. The Speaker before me talked about the fact that local governments are starting to change their behaviour. Some of the projects that they've put forward in their long-term plans are different. I think part of that is that they are responding to a signal from this national government about the fact that there is an expectation, and of course by the Minister of Local Government, there is an expectation of local governments to be more mindful of how they are spending ratepayers' money. They are more mindful clearly of the economic conditions that we are in right now. And just as every household is tightening their belt and central government is tightening belts, they are as well. So they are responding to the circumstances that we live in, as well as a signal of this particular piece of legislation. So it's great to see that they have taken that on board. It's very simple, Mr Speaker. This bill is about reducing costs. The anticipated savings, you could argue around the edges, but we're talking about potentially $25 million saved in interest costs for local councils. That's a massive savings and a reduction of a burden on our ratepayers. It's also a reduction in the duplication. So if you think about our different district councils, some are very small in size, other large like Auckland Council, it actually reduces the burden on them in terms of having to deal with a sometimes very complex issue of borrowing and financing for their debts. This, Mr Speaker, doesn't mean that the local councils have to borrow through this funding agency. They still have other funding options available to them, but it does provide them with a choice. And as the Minister said in his opening comments, there will be a strong move by many of the councils to get their funding through the funding agency. The other side of it is that it also provides an opportunity for mum and dad investors, and if we are successful in being re-elected after the 26th of November, there'll be other investment opportunities for them, so there'll be a whole suite that they can choose from. And if I look locally at the Taupo electorate, there is a significant list of projects that need to be completed within the 3 different district councils, all of which need funding. Some are significant, and I spoke about the water and wastewater projects in the first reading of this bill. And I know, having spoken to the councillors in the Taupo electorate, just how grateful they are that central government is extending a significant hand of assistance to them in a very real and a very practical way that assists them in reducing their costs. That's why, Mr Speaker, I'm very pleased to support the local government borrowing bill in the second reading, and I'll be pleased to see it through to its fruition.
I call the Honourable Ruth Dyson.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. It gives me